Okay, great. Let's get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ian Andrews. I'm the Executive Director with Lakewood Alive. And we're really pleased that you're joining us today. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to talk about the Paycheck Protection Program and understanding the new flexible guidelines. PPP has been top of mind for many, many months. And for better or for worse, the rules have consistently kept changing. In this case, I think it's for the better. We're going to learn more about what that looks like, and we hope it's going to be able to help explain to you how to ensure that you can make every effort to turn this loan into a forgivable loan and not have to repay it. So let's dive right in. Here's the agenda for the day. We'll run through some of the things that we've been doing, our panel introductions, presentations, and questions and answers. We would ask, if you have some questions, please type them into the thought bubble. I'm joined by my colleague, Allison Urbanik. She is our Housing and Internal Operations Director. So Allison will help us out with the questions. Thank you, Allison, for your assistance. Please ask whatever you like, because we've got a really great team on the line here. Many of you who have been a part of these webinars have seen these slides and remember them, but Lakewood Alive's mission is to foster and sustain vibrant neighborhoods. And a large part of that is working to ensure that we have thriving commercial corridors supporting small businesses. So during this entire time, working with the City of Lakewood, the Chamber of Commerce, this is now our 9th webinar that we're really pleased about, and we want to continue hosting webinars because this pandemic is not over, and there are more challenges coming. Running through the rent relief program, working with organizations like First Federal Lakewood, which still has a $2,500 emergency bridge loan. I'll ask Paul, who's on the line with us, to talk about that a little bit later. And then getting them in with PPP that is still available. There are still monies to be had. And so we recommend that you reach out to folks like First Federal Lakewood to go through that process, regardless of whether you have an account with them or not. Our Small Business Task Force with the mayor has really taken a lead on some exciting projects that we've been able to see come to fruition, coordinating with Downtown Lakewood Business Alliance and Uptown Lakewood, 2 different merchant associations, as well as partnering with the West End Lakewood Merchant Association, connecting businesses with people like who are going to present today, and navigating all these different programs and continuing to advocate on your behalf with our elected officials. The relationship with the city, both the administration and city council, has never been stronger, and that is hopefully leads to some results that are going to help small businesses, along with our county councilman, Dale Miller, who's been a huge advocate for us. So today, our panel, we're going to start with Paul Kapka with First Federal Lakewood. So Paul, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and just saying a few words.
You bet. Thanks, Ian, and thanks, Allison, and welcome everybody participating today, and happy to be here with my colleagues Terry and Will as well. Again, Paul Kapka, First Federal Lakewood. We are super happy to be part of the presentation today. In his local bank, we worked with lots of local customers of varying sizes, and through the entire PPP process, we ended up originating. And again, as Ian said, the program is still open, about 700 loans, and in both rounds 1 and rounds 2. So we went live this past Monday with a loan forgiveness process, fully automated. I'm happy to talk about a little bit, but presentation today is really timely, so happy to be here. Thanks, Ian.
Great, thank you. Terry Vincent, who is with Browse McDowell, is an attorney. Terry, if you wouldn't mind just saying a few words, introducing yourself. Okay, I believe we may have lost Terry. He's going to rejoin us in just a little bit. And then also Will Costello. Will, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and saying a few words about what you've been seeing as a CPA relative to PPP.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Lakewood Live, for having me on. I'm Will Costello. I'm a CPA. My firm's Lasky Costello here in Lakewood. And, we have a lot of clients that have gone through this process, and we're happy to guide, working closely with banks. In particular, First Federal Lakewood has been a great partner with a lot of my clients. So it's been a crazy process because there's been so many changes, but it's gone relatively well, especially in recent weeks, how things have gone. And now with the new forgiveness, hopefully we can not have any more changes and get this thing straightened out. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we're going to pivot now to Paul. And Paul, I apologize. We had one extra letter on your name, so we just took care of that. So we're going to go to Paul Kapka,
Sure.
and he's going to run through the changes that have come down from the PPP FA, I believe, or FLA, whatever the acronym is now, the Flexible Act.
Okay.
And then we will ask Terry and Will to chime in after each section, add any input that they have. And then, folks, please put your questions in the thought bubble, and then we will get to them most likely at the end. If there's something that is super pressing and germane to what was just said, we'll sprinkle those in. So, Paul, I'm going to get out of this one. We'll go to yours. And if I could ask you
Sure.
to take it away. And let me know when you want me to transition to the next slide. Just say next slide, and I'll make that happen.
That's perfect. And we can go to the next slide and appreciate starting here. And it feels a bit like alphabet soup with SBA and PPP and LFA, but once we get used to the acronyms, it's been a good process. And as Will said and Ian said, there have been some positive changes, positive for the borrowers in round 2 and with the recent legislation. So just a real quick highlight on a few of them, and we'll certainly have ample time in between or at the end of the presentations for questions and answers that you might have. So just, again, real high level on the first slide, the extension of the covered period has increased from 8 to 24 weeks. A borrower can elect for either one. Give them a bit more time to use qualifying expenses over the 24 weeks, so that's definitely a positive. More significantly maybe is the reduction in payroll cost requirement. Remember round 1, for the first legislative action, 75% of the expenses were to be used for payroll expenses. That's been reduced to 60. So hopefully folks can more easily qualify for maximizing forgiveness. So if you spend less than 60% of the loan amount on payroll costs, you're still eligible for forgiveness. It's not a threshold that must be met in terms of all or nothing. So that's a positive as well. And there's calculations to ascertain the forgiven amount, but the 60% certainly is an improvement from the 75% originally. Next slide, please, Ian. Thank you. Yeah, the new legislation also expanded the safe harbor provisions for FTEs. So in the event that you're unable to hire somebody for a variety of reasons, whether folks aren't qualified or positions weren't able to be filled, or in some instances, you've got a restaurant or food service business where the social distancing requirements are very strict for obvious reasons. Even inability to hire folks back due to that, there is a safe harbor provision that allows some flexibility there as well. So again, I think as Congress and the SBA have worked through the round 1 and heard some of the feedback from trade groups and banks and borrowers, did especially in this arena introduce some flexibility related to rehiring FTEs. Thanks, Ian. Next slide, please.
Before we go on, Will, anything you wanted to add either about the change in payroll allocation from 75 to 60% or on the safe harbor provisions?
No, the only note I had was I've had a lot of clients ask if they don't reach the 60%, is it all or nothing? And Paul's slide pointed it out well, but just to reiterate, there is partial forgiveness available if you don't reach the 60%. I think most people that I'm dealing with anyway are going to reach that threshold, and it's obviously easier now because it went from 75 to 60. But there was some wording that people thought if you don't reach the 60, well, then nothing's forgiven, and that's not the case. There is partial forgiveness. So I just wanted to reiterate that, but Paul has that in his slide as well. So
yeah,
thanks. Great, thank you. And unfortunately, we still have lost Terry, so once he gets back in, we'll ask him for his input as well. All right, we'll continue on. Paul, go right ahead.
Sounds great. Thanks, Ian. Extension of payment deferral on the next slide. Again, it's not getting too deep into the math calculations. It does extend the deferral period in a variety of ways. Again, the deferral of first payments due originally P&I were to be due within 6 months of funding within round one. A recent legislation has amended that. And so the date in which the amount of forgiveness be determined likely means at least 10 months, could be a bit longer. So they are providing a bit more of a runway before any P&I payments might start. Again, that's only in the event that full forgiveness is not achieved. We'll talk about that a bit, but additional runway and additional time to pay those proceeds back as well in that regard. Okay,
Will,
next
anything
slide.
to add on this topic?
No, I don't think so. It's a good point that there's no real. You do want to take advantage of the forgiveness application, but there's no real rush. I don't know if Paul wants to speak to any questions that he's received, but I've had people ask, should I apply the day that the period's over? And not necessarily. It's not like you're going to lose it if you don't apply that day. And there's time to kind of get your paperwork together, really analyze everything, make sure that you got all your T's crossed and I's dotted to make sure that you're going to get the forgiveness. There's no need to rush into it. So.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Will. And again, without P&I payments not starting anyways, I think is a great point to make sure, and we'll talk about this later, that even if you're using the new easy format, easy being 4 or 5 pages instead of 12, that you document everything. So absolutely documenting from start to finish with payroll records, and we'll talk a bit about that, is really important. So good point there, that even if you're able to qualify for full forgiveness, just make sure that you have all your documentation in place before you apply. Next slide, Ian's ready, has moved it for us, appreciate it. So maturity date has been extended to 5 years. So this will be for any amount that's not forgiven. Remember in round one, that was a 2-year payback. And a little bit of a nuance here, but any loan made after June 5 automatically is required to extend the payback period to 5 years. And for any loan made prior to June 5th, there is guidance that if the borrower requests and the lender agrees, any loan originated prior to that June 5th date could be extended to 5 years as well. And just speaking on behalf of Lakewood, if folks request additional time period up to that 5 years, we would certainly grant that. So there's some flexibility there. It's a requirement for the June 5 and after loans, and a mutual agreement for loans originated prior to that date as well. So additional flexibility for the borrowers. And that would be at the 1% interest rate. Sorry, at the 1% interest rate. I'll pause there.
No, I don't have anything additional to add to that.
All right, next slide, please. Okay, so the exciting new EZ application, again, it's a little tongue-in-cheek. It is 4 pages as opposed to, I think, 11 or 12, but it's a nice enhancement and a simpler form, and is available specifically for 3 buckets of borrowers to qualify to use the form. And they're listed out here, the first 3 hash marks: self-employed with no employees, or did not reduce salaries or wages of employees by more than 25% and did not reduce the number of hours for their employees. Or the 3rd category, borrowers who may have experienced reductions in business activity as a result of health directives related to COVID-19, social distancing, and sanitation, etc., and did not reduce salaries of employees for by more than 25%. So each of these categories of borrowers are eligible to use the new easy version, which again is a simpler format for the forgiveness application. The easy application, I don't know if anybody's looked at it, but doesn't require the Schedule A, which is fairly significant. It does have fewer calculations and less documentation required. There's a certification that each borrower will ascertain that they qualify for the easy format. But regardless of this, again, we'll still reiterate, please keep all your payroll records and expenses, even though they may not be required per Schedule A. Documentation is just as important. I'll pause there. Any questions or additional comments from from Will or from Ian? I apologize.
I'll just,
Go ahead.
No, that's okay. I just, I don't have any really additional comments other than I've worked with a few clients of mine who are self-employed, and the easy application, yeah, it's like you said, it's down to 5 pages. I think something that would help anybody that's considering that is there is an instruction sheet that's available that you can see, even if you just Google, 3508 easy instructions. It kind of goes over these same things that are in this slide, but it reiterates the points of how you qualify to use the easy version. That's my comment.
There's good guidance out there, and it's I think there's a downloadable version with fillable fields, just like we have in our application. So it's easier for sure.
Yeah.
To walk through. Okay, thanks, Ian. Next slide, please. Just some additional thoughts there, and Will, if he had any others, or Terry, if you're back on to chime in, feel free. This has come up a couple of times. The forgiven loan amounts, I don't know if it's obvious, but it's not treated as taxable income. So in other instances, in previous years, if you're working with a bank and some of the loan is forgiven or credit card debt is forgiven, that could be treated as taxable income, the forgiveness amount. Here it's specifically excluded from the legislation. But the expenses that you've used to calculate and qualify for the forgiveness are not deductible either. So it's sort of a, pass-through isn't the right word, but that's the logic is, hey, I think if the loan's forgiven, then the expenses can't be double counted, for lack of a better word. There has been recent discussion and introduction of legislation at the Senate, Senator Cornyn out of Texas, perhaps to allow for the deduction of the expenses that you're using to calculate the forgiveness amount. But as of today, and we'll feel free to chime in.
Sorry about that.
The banks,
yeah,
no problem. I'll keep moving, and we'll feel free to chime in. But that may change the double dip option, but as of today, it has not. Again, the bank's role, regardless. Go ahead, Will. Sorry.
Well, my point real quick is, yeah, I agree that may change. I actually think that it's likely that it will change just with what's going on. But the point to reiterate is that as of today, that's how it stands. So it is something to make sure you talk with your accountant or your tax accountant to make sure that you're preparing for that at this point, to know that there is some tax consequences to the loan. So keep that in mind as of right now.
Right. Yeah, that's good. Good insight. Bank, our role, again, we're the conduit to the SBA. So we're relying a lot on the borrowers' attestations that they qualify for the easy, and the documents that they're submitting to us are accurate. So we do have a duty to review that those documents have been submitted, but we're not acting as an underwriter and really relying on a lot of the borrower information. So again, just to plug here for Will, all kidding aside, to talk to your tax advisor or consultant to make sure that you have all the documents accurate and timely and reviewed. Again, not really relying on the bank to provide any sort of interpretation of those. So the more work you can complete on your own or with your advisor certainly will expedite the process. The bank does have 60 days to review the information once it's submitted from the borrower relative to the forgiveness steps. So it's a couple months there, and then the SBA has 90 days to agree or disagree with that decisioning. So I guess the method here is that although taking your time and walking through the steps is certainly important, just know there's a time lag of, oh boy, 3 to 5 months until any forgiveness might be ascertained. We have hired a third party who's going to work exclusively on our forgiveness applications. This is they're very expert. They have a portal set up. They're working with all of our borrowers. So we hope it would be less than the 60 days for us to turn these around. But just know whoever you're working with, that's the outside time frame in terms of response. And just the digital or bust, we talked about this in our last presentation. SBA requires everything to be digital. I imagine your banks would as well. PDF probably suffices, but even in Excel format or QuickBooks certainly will expedite and is required anyways as part of the application. So think through really documenting everything digitally. And Will, didn't know if you had any thoughts from your chair on that in that regard.
No additional. I mean, this is a good layout of additional thoughts, so I don't have anything to add to it.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Ian. I just want to let everyone know we're having some issues. Terry is on. He can hear us, but unfortunately, I just can't see his name to unmute him. So he and I are texting back and forth. So it's not as though Terry walked away or gave up. He is here. We're just having some tech issues. So I apologize to everybody, especially to Terry. So Terry, I'm sorry about that. That's all I have right now. Do you want to continue on?
Yeah, just a couple, I guess, high-level thoughts, and we can either open up or if Terry wanted to type something in and read it out. But there is additional flexibility for to include costs in your calculation that have been incurred but not paid yet. This is an obvious one in terms of, let's think of a payroll cycle, perhaps payroll being actually remitted your employees after the termination of the covered period. So they have allowed for, the new legislation allows for expenses incurred to be counted as part of the calculations, even they may not have been paid yet. We've talked to some borrowers and customers about keeping separate bank accounts. Maybe that helps with a bit of the accounting or tracking of expenses. We may have talked about that in our first presentation, I'm not sure, but we have seen separate accounting relative to the PPP to make it maybe a bit easier for a borrower to look at all the activity they've experienced during the covered period. And well, I don't know if you've seen that either, but that might help just in aggregating the expenses as you're working through.
Yeah, I've recommended that to most people that have asked.
Yeah.
If that's a possibility, to definitely take advantage of opening a separate account, and then also from a bookkeeping standpoint, if they're able to use some sort of class tracking, I think that helps. Just any way that they can really stay on top of tracking what they've spent and making sure that they're taking full advantage and getting full forgiveness for the loan.
For sure. I'll pause there. Just had a few other tips and nuggets, Ian, but maybe a good spot to see if Terry can chime in or maybe take a couple questions and before we're too long. So that's all I had in my presentation, just real high level. Be happy to kick it back to you and Allison for Q&A or for Terry's input, whatever you think is best.
Okay, so I'm just going to ask a few questions. I think if we could just take a step back here and take just a moment to explain the difference between PPP and the economic injury disaster loan. So if people, I know that that's different than what we're talking about, but I have had a couple of questions asking how the PPP differs from the EIDL loan.
Sure. Did you want me to take that?
Sure.
So the PPP has some restrictions. Obviously, it's a forgivable loan, where the EIDL loan really can be used for most any business expense, but it's not a forgivable loan. There's a $10,000 advance that is forgiven, sort of like a grant. But I've had quite a few questions, and it's hard to find a definitive answer. But my understanding is that if you were to get both of these loans, your forgiveness on the PPP is reduced by what you receive on the EIDL. I don't know if Paul, you have additional information on that. You can't get both and have them both.
Correct.
Have the 10,000 forgiven and the PPP all forgiven. I think it's reduced by that amount.
That's correct. That would be considered double dip. That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But the EIDL is a 30-year, beyond the grant, it's a 30-year loan, 3.5%, whereas the PPP is a forgivable loan. Anything that's not forgiven, obviously, we already touched on the 2-year or the 5-year loan period at 1%.
Great. Thank you so much for talking about the differences. I appreciate it. So we have a question from Kathy. Kathy is an independent contractor, and she's asking, how do you make the choice between an 8 or 24-week period for using the PPP?
Will, from your chair, go ahead. I don't know if there's an advantage that you see, but please go ahead.
No, I don't see that there's an advantage either way. It's especially for someone who is self-employed and has no employees. It's really, there's not much advantage one way or the other, I don't think. Agreed. The only thing I can see possibly is that the 24-week period, it looks like it's allowable for maybe, I don't know, the calculation would potentially allow for a little bit more, but maybe Paul could speak to that. I don't see that actually, because you're looking at financials and a tax return from 2019, which would result in the same dollar amount, I think. So.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't know that one's more beneficial than the other. I think that the longer time period, it was just meant to give folks some flexibility and a bit more breathing room. But if you're maximizing, especially if you're a sole proprietor with no employees, if you're maximizing the amounts fairly is capped anyways, and you can do that in 8 weeks, it would seem to me that would. I don't think there's an advantage or any other than a little bit of breathing room in the 24 weeks, just to make sure you have all your ducks in a row.
Right.
I think it's very similar. Mm-hmm.
Hey folks, this is Ian. I'm just going to chime in quickly. This is how we're going to pull this together and keep Terry engaged. He texted me and said, though, that independent contractors may not use it up in 8 weeks. And so he would recommend, he says that you would need to go for the 24 weeks. And in fact, I'll add on to that and ask the question, did the PPP FA, the Flexible Act, does it allow now for owner compensation to change from that 8 weeks of 2019 net profits, this is for the sole proprietors, to 2.5 months of the 2019 net profits, maxing out at 20,833? Is that just for sole proprietors, or is that for anybody?
So I read it as, and Will, feel free to chime in. I read it as specifically in the application as owner/employed, or self-employed. So essentially sole proprietor, owner-employer.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was touching on before, is maybe you'd be able to get a little bit more because of the 2.5 month period versus the 8 week period of what's allowable to get in the loan, I suppose, for a self-employed independent contractor. So that might help them getting the $20,000 instead of $15,000 max potentially. But again, it's all still based on, what their net profit was. So if they're not at that point anyway, they might not get to that.
Got it. And Terry does say, yeah, agreed that it would be, they do need to go to the 2.5 months of the 2019 net profits to calculate. So it sounds like the answer is that as a sole proprietor, the 24 weeks would be the way to go. Anyone correct me if I'm wrong, but it appears that's the answer we're looking for.
I would say, yeah, I would agree. Only if you can't, like Terry pointed out in his text to you, if you don't feel like you're going to be able to utilize the money for, various expenses, or really as a self-employed individual compensating yourself in that period, then yeah, you could stretch it out for the 24 weeks. That would be the only advantage of just more time.
And if I could just add on to that, then if we could. We've had a question from a sole proprietor. Could they simply use 100% of the funds to pay themselves if that would be less or equal to 24 weeks of profits? And would that be forgiven?
I mean, I would say yes, again, based on, there's the max dollar limitation, which is, based on their net profit from the year before. And then if they're not going to be over 100,000, well, then there's that $20,000 limitation. But yes, if you're using it all to, I mean, that's part of why it was rolled out for self-employed individuals, so they're able to compensate themselves. I don't know if Paul has anything to add to that.
Yeah, I agree. Yep, agreed.
Terry also is in agreement as well. He said that yes, that's correct.
Yes.
Okay, great. And then are health insurance premiums allowed as a payroll cost? And I think we've talked about this in the past that they are, but just want to clarify that.
Yes, they are.
Yes.
Great. And then just a reminder to folks, what is the minimum amount that can be spent on payroll expenses to have the loan partially forgiven?
Minimum amount on payroll. It's a good question. You would still qualify for partial forgiveness even if it's less than 60%, right? So let's say you have $100,000 that in costs. I'll just use a rough example, and feel free to chime in. And you spend $50,000 of that on payroll, so you're not quite at 60%. They still qualify for $83,000 in forgiveness. The $50,000 divided by 60%. So I don't know. There's a minimum amount. That's a good question, but most folks you think would at least get to 50% of expense of the PPP funds expended on payroll.
This is Ian chiming in on behalf of Terry, and he said there is no minimum. No minimum required there. And he also, going back just one question to what Allison brought up, said with regard to healthcare, he said the employer portion is what is forgivable. Yes.
Yes. Thank
right.
you.
Thank you.
Good clarification. Yep.
That is good clarification. Yeah, and I would agree with both on there is no minimum dollar amount, but again, to get forgiveness, you have to first off spend the money on the various required amounts. So, or the required categories. So payroll, rent, mortgage, interest, utilities. So anything that you're not spending, there's a calculation there, obviously, of what would be forgiven, and the rest could potentially turn into a loan.
And when the original PPP in that example was originated or approved, likely the borrower would have used the payroll expenses and to extrapolate that. So if there's, I'm just thinking out loud, if those dollars aren't maximized or spent on payroll, if something has changed, you may qualify for a safe harbor relative to FTEs and some of the other provisions. So
Right.
I'll pause
right.
there, but there's other exceptions that may help as well.
Great. So I just want to reiterate, we have had a lot of questions about the economic injury disaster loan and the PPP. So correct me if I'm wrong, you can do both the PPP and the economic injury idle disaster loan, but you do have to be careful. If you do take monies from the idle loan, those are a loan and there's a repayment, where on the PPP, we are working to, kind of spend things according to the different percentages so that you can work to get that forgiven. So really, forgiveness is only on the PPP and not the idle loan, correct?
Yeah, that is correct. You can get $10,000 of the idle loan can be a grant, but again, if you're double dipping and getting both of these loans, you have to reduce the forgiveness on the PPP based on that as well. So taking out both loans is possible, and I have some clients that have considered doing that, but they do have to understand that one is a loan that is repayable over a 30-year period. And it does have an impact on the forgiveness of the PPP as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, Will, let me just ask then, in a scenario, if you get an idle loan and the first $10,000 is a grant, you also receive PPP, and you say it's $40,000. Would you then essentially have 30,000 of that 40 would be forgiven because the 10 from the idle is a grant? And then you deduct it from the amount that you receive from PPP. Is that essentially how it works?
That's my understanding. Yes. I don't know if Paul has any.
No, I would agree. Yep. There's a box when you apply for the PPP that asks that question: have you received an idle grant? So that would be. It's either, I don't know if it's upfront netted out or after the fact, but yes, that would be included as part of your forgiveness, stop forgiveness.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then just to add on that, and I know that this presentation is mostly about PPP, but I am going to take advantage of the knowledge here in the room. We do have a question. So someone was the idle loan up to $20,500, but they don't need that much. But the $10,000 would be helpful. So how does someone get $10,000 of a grant or forgiven through the EIDL loan?
I'm not completely an expert in that process of how you determine the dollar amount there. I know the 10,000 is an advance, and that can be grant. I don't know how they're, and that application is done directly through the SBA, so you're not really using a bank in that situation either. But I can't speak to exactly how you determine the reduction in the dollar amount there.
Okay, so hey, Dan Morgan, we're going to talk to our friends over at the SBA, and we're going to get you some information and email it to you. If you could shoot me a chat with your email address, the preferred email address, or just ask it as a question, I'll get that information and we'll make sure to get back to you with a little bit more information about the EIDL and the $10,000 grant portion of that.
And Allison, if you want to forward that to me as well, and I can take a look too, because it's a question that has come up with other clients, and I'm happy to kind of dig into it and get some answers for you.
Absolutely, happy to do that, Will. Thank you. Okay, so I have a question from Lori asking about being an independent contractor. What is the latest information with being able to have the PPP and also collect unemployment?
Can you say that again?
Sure. So if someone was to have the PPP, can they also collect unemployment as an independent contractor?
So this is Paul. In round one, we had this question a couple of times. I don't know if anything has changed. We can certainly do a bit more research, but the intent of the PPP is to keep folks off the unemployment rolls, right? By having payroll expenses or funds, monies to fund payroll. So we had taken sort of the interpretation, at least in the round one loans, that it was one or the other. So if you're collecting unemployment, in theory, the PPP should be paying for folks to stay off of unemployment. A bit trickier when you're a sole proprietor, I think, or self-employed. But again, the idea of the PPP is you would use the funds to pay yourself and thereby be ineligible for unemployment. I don't.
Terry has said that it has not changed. That has not changed from round one. Go ahead, Will.
No, I was saying I agree exactly with what Paul just said.
Okay, so I think we are pretty much caught up with the questions. But before we do move forward, are there still PPP funds available? And if someone who's on this call maybe has an EIDL loan application but would like to perhaps look into the PPP, is that still something that they're able to do?
Yes, until the end of the month. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so anyone on the call who wants to do that and needs some help getting connected, you can contact Ian here on the call, which he'll have our contact information, or you can reach out to anyone on any local bank, perhaps First Federal, as they're on the call as well. So until the end of the month, so we still have roughly 6 days for that. Okay, Ian, we are all caught up with questions at the moment.
Great, thank you. A couple questions that I have then, and maybe some of these have been addressed, but I just wanted to simply ask. So there is the extension of the loan maturity date. It's, as you said, was extended from 2 years to 5. However, it is saying, from what I understand, the law reads that the extension is only applicable to PPP loans made after June 5th, which is when it was signed into law. Paul, can you speak to what folks who should do or can do who applied for and or received prior to June 5th to try to take advantage of that 5-year runway if, in fact, the loan is not going to be forgiven?
Absolutely. Richard, just to reach out to your banker. So if both the borrower and banker mutually agree to extend the loan to 5 years, it can be extended. So just speaking on behalf of First Federal Lakewood, if a borrower requests to extend the loan from 2 years to 5 years, we would certainly grant that. Again, the loan is for whatever remaining unforgiven amount is left over. And it's a mutually agreeable language, is the language in the law relative to loans prior to June 5, and we would certainly. So if your loan is not with Lakewood, whatever bank you're working with can certainly request that they work with you as well and extend up to 5 years if you so choose. It is the law for loans made after that date, as Ian indicated. So it's a 5-year from the June 5th forward, regardless. That's the law. But yeah, we'd be happy to work with folks for sure.
Great, thank you. Another question I have: can you speak to the delay of payroll taxes? Does the new Flexibility Act allow borrowers to delay payment of their payroll taxes? How does it work, and how long can those taxes be delayed? Just kind of walk us through that.
Will, have you seen that, or Terry?
Yeah,
anyone?
Sorry if I thought I was on mute. Yeah, there is a delay in payroll taxes, and it even applies to self-employment tax as well. I think the delay goes to 12/31/2021 for 50% of it, and 12/31/2022 actually for the other 50%. I don't have that exact detail and that information in front of me, so I'm not exactly sure, but I could follow up and get that information to you, Ian, if you need it, because I have information on that.
Yeah, that would be helpful, because I think that's something that is kind of flown under the radar that even as I was digging into this, I discovered. So that'd be helpful to share. So thank you. Also, if Paul, I think you did get into this, but if we can just kind of reiterate, when it comes to the easy form, because this is new for everybody as we're looking at filling this out, the 3508 EZ. I believe there are 3 tests that someone would need to meet one of the 3 tests in order to fill out the form. Could you run us through those? I have them in front of me, but would you mind running us through those?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, just to reiterate them, and the borrower will have to ascertain to these and attest to it as part of the EZ application. But the first category of eligible borrowers would be self-employed with 0 employees. They're eligible to use the EZ form. The second category of borrowers is borrowers that had employees and did not reduce the salaries or wages during the covered period, and did not reduce hours worked by the employees as well. Or the third borrower, a bit more nuanced, that would be eligible for the EZ app. Borrowers that had employees, did not reduce salaries and wages during the covered period, and due to complying with shelter in place or social distancing or sanitation rules, or unable to operate at the same level of business that existed prior to February 15. So sort of the example that arises is a food service industry that might be impacted by seats and other things relative to levels of business. So either one of those 3 categories of folks can use the EZ. If you don't fit into either of those 3, you can still use the traditional PPP loan forgiveness application. It's 11 or 12 pager with the Schedule A bit more in depth, but certainly can use that. So it's really, I think it's come up a couple times. It's around 2 loans are really meant to work with self-employed, really help self-employed in smaller companies. And this is another example of that with the simplified loan forgiveness app, the EZ form application.
Thank you.
Just to clarify, Paul, with the loan extension to 5 years, does that remain at 1%?
Yes.
Okay, great. And
yes.
then I just got, thank you so much for that answer. And then someone just called FFL to get an appointment and was told that they may no longer be taking applications. Is there someone they should reach out to directly?
Yeah, so if there's certainly Alex Kaufman, I don't have her extension here, or they can call me. or email me. My direct line is 529-2714, and I'll get them to the right person, no problem.
Wonderful, thank you. And we'll make sure to have, again, the contact information will be sent out as a follow-up to this, as well as it might appear on our screen here at the end for folks. And then just a more specific question, are workers' compensation payments an eligible expense?
Will, I'll defer to your tax expertise.
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so. No, I don't think so.
Great. So the telephone number for Paul just got sent to the group. So make sure you check your chat boxes for that phone number.
Hey, I've Terry, if you wouldn't mind, Terry just chimed in and actually said yes to the last one. Would you mind just sending something in the chat? Folks, I really do apologize if this is a little wonky, but I want to make sure we take advantage of the insight. And also, I wanted to circle back to one thing that we had said earlier. So for forgiveness of being incurred on payroll taxes, that you still need to get the extended date. So I think there's a little more information to come on that end, but we're going to try to get a little bit more from Terry on the last question. Again, my apologies. And as Allison said, yeah, please give Paul, your phone's going to blow up here shortly. Give him a call, and we'll hopefully get you in with PPP. Terry said that, yeah, part of payroll expense is workers' compensation. So it is eligible. So we're going to send out all the info, as Allison said, for contacts. Please feel free to reach out to Terry. He can give you some more insight into some of these questions.
Okay, I do have another question here from Barbara asking, if I furloughed employees, must I use the long form?
Furloughed. So if it's furloughed, I would read it under the third bucket of the easy application. If it's furloughed for reasons related to COVID-related social distancing, for example, or unable to operate as you were prior to the pandemic, I would suggest that third category might be a fit. Again, don't know the reasons for the furlough, but I would look closely at that exception under the easy application, the third category.
Great, thank you so much. So we are now caught up with questions, Ian, on my end.
Great, thank you. And thanks, Allison, for pulling up the SBA link. I just sent it out. The first time it didn't link. Second time it's linked, folks, so you can see that there. I also have another question. So can we just simply maybe more kind of a thought, how is the Flexibility Act advantageous for restaurants? Because as we were talking a couple months ago, PPP relative to restaurants was really challenging because they weren't able to operate. They didn't have anything for their staff to do. And while, to Paul's point, the point of PPP was to keep folks off of unemployment, that posed some really significant challenges, not to mention the fact that folks on unemployment were receiving $600 a week in addition to unemployment benefits, which obviously aren't really that much. So can Paul or Will, can you guys chime in maybe about how this is more advantageous for restaurants, and if they haven't taken advantage of PPP, why they should here before the end of the month?
Yeah, I think just the complying in space rules and operating in a new norm and was facing is probably the biggest carve out. So as we kind of thought through the different businesses that have applied, certainly seems like the service industry has really been impacted just based on the limitation on the number of customers simply. So some of it is documentation. Just make sure that prior to February 15, you have good records on how you used to operate, and then after the pandemic, what it's looked like. So if there's questions, maybe sitting with either your advisor or with the banker in the application process. But I think the advantageous component is you can keep folks in theory employed and paid with the PPP funds, and then you know, as long as you're paying the payroll, you can maximize your forgiveness, right, all the way through. And then there's the easy form on the backside as well. So long-winded answer. It's not a cure-all for sure, but it's certainly, my opinion, would be an option just based on the impact you may have even today as folks are coming back with spacing requirements and things of that nature. So I'll pause there. We'll have clients that have same thoughts or concerns, but certainly there's flexibility there.
Go ahead, Will.
Yeah, no, you touched on it exactly. I mean, I think the the extension of the period was geared towards, I mean, restaurants and service industry were probably the number one reason that happened. There was a, you know, when you're shut down completely, and you rush to get the PPP loan, but you're unable to utilize that because you can't keep people employed because you don't have the same level of service that you're providing. Now you can stretch it out over a longer period, and it makes more sense now that we're able to open back up, albeit on a smaller scale, and there's still something there. So
great, thank you. And Terry, he chimed in and added a couple of notes, and Will, you hit it right on the head. So he's in agreement with what you had to say. Those are all of the questions that I had prepared ahead of time. Allison, do we have anything else from the audience?
We are all caught up, Ian. Thanks for asking.
Great. Thank you. Folks, thanks for asking those questions. There is so much happening around PPP, and I'm sure you're probably going to have more questions. So please, feel free to reach out to the folks who are on the call today, Paul, Will, and Terry. And gosh, Terry, I really feel bad about the way the phone went, but thanks for hanging with us and texting along the way. So really appreciate your flexibility. We'll send out, as Allison and I have indicated a few times, we'll send out contact information along with some different additional info. We will reach out to our partners at the SBA to follow up with Dan, and I believe Linda also is looking for some of that information too. So there's a whole lot happening that we'll certainly make sure to follow up on and get you in touch with folks. Also, as you can see on the screen, please feel free to reach out to me with any questions. And while I certainly don't have all the answers, we've got a lot of folks who we will connect you with who hopefully can help out. Also, our friends at the Chamber of Commerce, and then Caitlin Milius at the City of Lakewood. So please, you can reach out to these folks. And then I would finally just simply say thank you to Paul. Any final words that you'd like to share with us?
No, thanks for having me today. And just hot off the presses, just a couple quick tips here. I came across my email from our external provider. So the 24-week covered period, initially it seemed like you couldn't apply for forgiveness until that 24-week ran. That's not the case per guidance this week. So if you maximize your forgiveness within the 24 weeks, you can apply at any time. And the payroll, any non-payroll documents such as mortgage, rent, utility expenses, you just have to show that those are in existence prior to February 15 as well through the covered period. So a couple minor tips that might help expedite the forgiveness applications. But thanks for having me today, Ian and Allison, and Terry and Will. Pleasure to be with you again today as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Will Costello of Lasky Costello. Will, any final thoughts?
No, nice job by Paul. So thank you for putting those slides together. It was, worked out well. And thanks, Lakewood Alive, and everyone for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Will. And thanks again to Terry Vincent, who, by the way, also is the chair of the board with the Lakewood Chamber of Commerce. So Terry is super invested in Lakewood and has just been a wonderful partner. Terry, thank you for your help, and we'll make sure to send out additional information to folks here in the next 24 hours. So, have any questions, please feel free. Reach out to us, 216-521-0655. Send us an email. We'll connect you with the experts on the team. Allison, thank you very much for your help today, as always. I appreciate you helping us out with the questions. And to everyone, we wish you the best. Please let us know how things are going. Let us know if you have any ideas or really some burning thoughts around future webinar sessions, because we want to keep this going. I realize there can be webinar burnout, so we hope we're bringing some quality programming to you as we try to all get through this together. I wish everyone a great day, and we'll talk with you soon. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
Stay well.